If you follow my channel, you know that I'm a fan of Rocketbook's reusable synthetic notebooks. These work with Pilot's thermosensitive and water-soluble friction pens to allow users to spray and erase their notes after using the Rocketbook app to scan and back up the content in the cloud destination of their choice. All things considered, this system works pretty well, but as Rocketbook users know, you're limited to using friction pens. And while you can swap friction ink cartridges into any Pilot G2 compatible pen body, like the Tactile Turn, Machine Era, and Otmog pens that I often use, the actual ink cartridge hasn't changed much over the years. That is, until now. This is the new Friction Point Clicker pen, which features Pilot's new Synergy tip. It provides a fresh take on the standard rollerball cartridges in an attempt to offer improved ink flow and writing precision. So in this video, I want to do a head-to-head comparison of the 0.5mm standard and Synergy friction pens. Let's get started. Overall, the external look of the Synergy clicker hasn't changed too much. If anything, it's a little simpler and more professional looking, swapping the gray tattoo pattern above the grip on the original friction pens for some metallic lime green highlights throughout the Friction and Synergy branding, and with all colors now using predominantly black bodies. Aside from this, the pen body has shrunk by about 3mm in length compared to the standard version, and it's also slimmed a little from 11mm to what I think is a more comfortable 10.25mm. Beyond this, the plastic conical tip of the Synergy pen now has 3 grooves turned into its base. I'm not sure this provides any functional benefit, but it looks kinda neat. Both the standard and Synergy pens unscrew above the grip to allow access to the ink cartridge. Again, the majority of the cartridge body is identical, as both use the overall dimensions of the non-erasable Pilot G2 pens, but the simple uniform conical tip of the standard friction cartridge is replaced by a much narrower 2-step Synergy tip. Both appear to use rollerball mechanisms, though the Synergy tip is noticeably wetter than the standard tip. To test the quality of the writing of the standard and Synergy pens, I rewrote a small sample note 4 times, first using the standard friction pens in blue and black ink, then again with the Synergy tip versions. I did this both on regular printer paper and then again in my Rocketbook Pro to see if there was any change from writing on Rocketbook synthetic paper. In all cases, the Synergy tip pens allowed the ink to flow a little more freely, which resulted in darker and slightly more uniform lines, as the ink began flowing faster with the Synergy tips. The downside of this is that there's more blotching near the end of a stroke with the Synergy pens, because the ink continues to flow freely when the pen slows down. On regular paper, the Synergy tip feels noticeably wetter and a little smoother than the standard friction tip, but when writing on Rocketbook synthetic paper, both feel quite smooth, so only the added wetness of the ink is noticeable. I also compared the Synergy tip to the standard 0.7mm friction pen, because it too deposits a little more ink on the page than the standard 0.5mm tip, and the Synergy tip looks quite similar, though not quite as dark as the standard 0.7mm tip. Taking a look at the scans from the Rocketbook app, both pens are fairly comparable, though I'd say the Synergy lines look a little bolder overall, again bearing a closer resemblance to the 0.7mm standard pens. While the added boldness of the Synergy pens provides a more uniform look, there could be drawbacks associated with depositing more ink with each stroke. To estimate the relative capacity of the standard and Synergy pens, I measured the starting height of both ink cartridges when they were new, then wrote out an identical note on a standard letter size Rocketbook Pro page, and measured the ink height change in the cartridge to see how much was used up. Both cartridges had similar starting heights, though the Synergy was slightly more filled at the beginning. That said, my test showed that the Synergy used up about 25% more ink than the standard pen to write the same note, which means that the overall lifespan of the pen is likely going to be less than the standard friction pen. These numbers aren't super scientific, as there are many variables here, like what notes you're writing and your writing style, so I wouldn't put too much weight into the 40 versus 47 page limits, but the relative difference is what's more important. Aside from the inconvenience and expense of having to replace Synergy cartridges more frequently, Rocketbook users know it's also important to consider the smudge factor that may result from depositing more ink on the non-absorbable synthetic pages. To assess this, I repeatedly wrote the word test in my Rocketbook Pro, then attempted to smudge the ink with my finger after a set amount of time, working my way up from 5 seconds until the ink didn't smudge. As in my previous comparison of the 0.38, 0.5, and 0.7mm standard friction pens, it took about 12 seconds before the standard 0.5mm pen's ink was dry. And as expected, the 0.5mm Synergy tip took longer, coming in at 17 seconds drying time, which places it comfortably between the standard 0.5mm pen and my previous result of 20 seconds for the 0.7mm standard tip. 5 seconds may not seem like a long time, but if you're rushing to take notes and end up flipping a page a little too early, it could be enough to cause some significant smudge damage. From my quick search on Amazon, it seems that Pilot has opted to hold the pricing fairly consistent for both the standard and Synergy tip friction pens, with both coming in around $6 for a 2-pack of clicker pens and between $17 and $19 for a dozen replacement cartridges. They're also both available in a variety of colors. I purchased a 10-pack of Synergy pens from Amazon, which included 8 different colors, as well as 2 repeats of the blue and black pens, all of which write similarly and show up pretty well in the Rocketbook scans, though there is a noticeable improvement from changing the scan settings to best for color, but this causes the template detail to show up in the scanned file. That said, overall I like the Synergy tip version of the friction ink cartridges. The ink is more uniform, provided you don't slow down your writing and allow the ink to pool too much. And I really like how thin the tip is because it provides a real clean line of sight to where I'm writing, making my note-taking feel a little more detailed and precise. This comes with the trade-off of added drying time, which increases your risk of smudging, as well as the expense of having to replace the cartridges more often, which is already an issue many viewers have noted for Pilot friction pens, so they may not be right for everyone. But if you're torn between the thinness of the standard 0.5mm friction pen and the bold smoothness of the 0.7mm tip, the 0.5mm Synergy tip in the friction point clicker may be worth a try. I'll leave a link to where you can find them in the video description. Otherwise, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.